into the world because of confirmed partnership between Russia and China. Here's why. The year 2022 came to a close with a highly fascinating virtual meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, during which they promised to improve relations between their two nations. China and Russia seek to form an alliance. Putin is aware of the hysteria that a partnership between Beijing and Moscow would cause in the West. To put things in perspective, that would mean Russia creating a partnership with China. And it'll be huge. Will Russia, however, obtain what it wants? Is it accurate to say that Xi Jinping consented to an alliance with Russia despite the heavy sanctions the West had placed on Moscow? What would such an alliance signify for the world, and more directly, for Ukraine? An intergovernmental military alliance, known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was established on April 4, 1949 in Washington. As a part of a collective security arrangement, NATO's independent member states agree to defend one another from attacks by other nations. The primary NATO headquarters are in Brussels. Numerous nations signed the agreement and were recognized as founding members, including Canada, Denmark, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, and the United States. After 1949, the treaty was ratified by Greece, Germany, Turkey, and Spain. Some of the nations that have joined after the fall of the Soviet Union include the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. Several NATO members sent armies to reinforce the alliance's eastern flank both before and during the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. To thwart a potential Russian assault, the alliance had stationed 40,000 troops along its 2,500-kilometer-long eastern flank. The protocols for Sweden and Finland's entrance were officially approved on July 5th by the North Atlantic Alliance members, ratifying the decisions made during the NATO summit. A potential military alliance exists between Russia and China. The two countries ratified the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation in 2001, and it covers their common land border. A 20-year strategic agreement that it was extended for another 5 years after it ended in February of 2022. With a population of more than 1.4 billion, China is the most populated nation in the world, while Russia has the biggest land area at over 17,098,246 square kilometers. China currently concentrates on developing its own weapons while continuing to purchase some military equipment from Russia, such as jet engines. As a part of the Votosk 2018 military exercise, Russia welcomed the armed forces of China and Mongolia in September of 2018. Bomber patrols over the Pacific were conducted jointly by China and Russia, and China declined to express opposition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China gave Russia economic aid after the war's international sanctions were put into place. In the middle of Moscow's 10-month-long battle in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping pledged to improve their bilateral relationship. In their opening remarks via video conference, which were made public, Putin and Xi avoided specifically mentioning Ukraine before entering into private discussions. They praised the strengthening of ties between Moscow and Beijing despite geopolitical worries and a difficult international landscape. Putin has stated a willingness to increase military cooperation. According to Putin, there is a particular place for military cooperation in their bilateral relations. He claimed that the Russia and Chinese armed forces should work more closely together. Xi responded that Beijing was prepared to increase strategic cooperation with Russia, provide each other with development opportunities, and be global partners for the benefits of the people of our countries and the interests of stability around the world. China, which has pledged a no-limits friendship with Russia, has steadfastly refrained from criticizing the latter's actions in Ukraine, blaming the United States and NATO for inciting Moscow, and has denounced the harsh sanctions put in place against it. The Financial Times reported that Beijing is ready to shift its foreign policy away from Moscow, citing anonymous Chinese officials and local experts. Out of worry and its disastrous invasion of Ukraine and the ultimate removal of Putin could lead to a fall of Russia's influence in politics and the economy. The Financial Times was informed by sources that the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party is becoming less confident in Putin. Last year, China was unaware that the Kremlin was preparing to launch a full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, Unlike the popularly accepted narrative of the events, they expected a little military effort. Li Yucheng, China's top Russia specialist and vice minister of foreign affairs at the time, was demoted as a result of Beijing's failure to gather precise intelligence on Putin's plans. Beijing was thus unprepared for the invasion, and Beijing still sees a lot of short-term benefit from its ties with the Kremlin and views its closeness with Putin as a good negotiating tool in its dealings with Europe, according to FT sources. According to officials, China is also expecting to profit from the increase in post-war reconstruction in Ukraine. Messages that should be carefully followed in the near and long term were also presented at the Communist Party of China's 20th National Congress. The 13th and 14th five-year development plans for China set the goal of achieving a certain level of prosperity and a newly developed middle class. 10 years ago, China had the second largest economy in the world after the United States, with a $6 trillion GDP and $2 trillion in exports, which meant that one-third of the country's output was exported. But just $3 trillion of China's $11 trillion GDP was produced through exports in 2015. This proved that the economy of the nation could no longer rely primarily on exports. Therefore, it was inevitable that China would return to battling against poverty while focusing on the new urbanization initiatives and a burgeoning new middle class within the country. In reality, key headings for these goals are included in the content of the previous two-year five-growth plans, focusing on numerous infrastructure and superstructure projects that will quickly raise the typical household spending power and the standard of life is necessary for China's economy, which is projected to grow to $19 trillion by the end of 2022 to remain sustainable. Although the 14th five-year development plan included significant goals for 2035 China, the challenges and priorities raised by the new international order show that China must finish its work fast in order to significantly enhance the living standards of its entire population by 2030. This critically essential topic's major themes are creating a contemporary socialist society in all respects and a society of average welfare in all aspects. The process is referred to as socialism in the modern era by Chinese President Xi Jinping. In the near future, China will focus on innovative strategies to combat inequalities and fight corruption, as well as innovative strategies to promote fertility with regard to population sustainability and aging. The issue of self-sufficiency has been caused by the COVID-19 outbreak and the current war in Ukraine. For leading nations to take the lead when world order is reformed, the global political economy is attempting to forge a new path for itself as the world order is being reformed. As a result of its size and the fact that the world's center of gravity has shifted from the Atlantic to the Pacific, China seeks to strengthen its ties with Europe and Africa. Because of this, it appears that the nations around the Atlantic coast will read extensively following the 20th National Congress. Government, military, and academic leaders were gathered by the U.S. Naval Institute to explore great power competition and the influences and forces forming the worldviews of China and Russia. What can the resurgent strategic struggle teach us about earlier wars like the Cold War? Russia and China's efforts to alter the global order, particularly initiatives aimed at confronting the United States, were discussed by keynote speakers and panelists. They looked at China and Russia's histories, cultures, religions, and geographical aspects as both sovereign countries and more recent allies. Russia has consistently supported China in its disputes with the United States over Taiwan. Both China and Russia are having problems at home. Putin is attempting to preserve domestic support for a conflict that has dragged on longer than expected. Authorities in Ukraine assessed the damage caused by the largest such assault in weeks, which involved a massive Russian missile attack on power plants and other critical infrastructure. China has recently become more outspoken in its warnings against the use of nuclear weapons, and Xi also being pressed by the European Union to use his influence on Putin to help put an end to the war. This comes after its declaration of no-limits partnership with Russia and its refusal to condemn Moscow were subjected to harsh scrutiny by the West. A no-limits collaboration between China and Russia has been guaranteed. This implies that China does not see any Western red lines as impassable. Will a military alliance be negotiated? Will Putin really get what he wants from China? The last thing Russia wants right now is for China to re-establish relations with the West. Russia still has a few months to persuade China to make the move. For Ukraine, such an alliance would make life more difficult. And the conflict in Ukraine is being armed and supported by the West. China will begin sending weapons to Russia, but China asserts that it has so far remained impartial in the conflict. Putin's top objective right now will be convincing China to drop its position of neutrality. Will Putin be successful? Do let us know what you think in the comments.